Now, one thing also that Elon hasn't really mentioned are the groups of people that are getting some of these payments. They're ridiculous. And we're talking about billions of dollars that we've already found. We found fraud and abuse. I would say those two words as opposed to the third word that I usually use, but in this case, fraud and abuse. It's abusive because most of these things are virtually made up, or certainly money shouldn't be sent to them. And you know what I'm talking about. It's crazy. So, but we're talking about tens of billions of dollars that we've already found. And now a judge who's an activist judge wants to try and stop us from doing this. Why? Why would they want to do that? I campaigned on this. I campaigned on the fact that I said government is corrupt. And it is very corrupt. It's very, very, it's also foolish. As an example, a man has a contract for 3 months and the contract ends, but they keep paying him for the next 20 years, because nobody ends a contract. You get a lot of that. You have a contract that's a three-month contract. Now, normally, if you're in a small, in all fairness, it's the size of this thing is so big.
Yeah.
But if you have a contract and you're in a regular business, you end the contract in 3 months. It's a consultant. Here's a contract for 3 months, but it goes on for 20 years. And the guy doesn't say that he got money for 20 years, They don't say it. They just keep getting checks month after month. And you have various things like that, and even much worse than that, actually, much worse. And I guess you call that incompetence, maybe.
Yeah.
It could be corruption. It could be deals made on both sides, where I guess the money he kicks. I think there's a lot of kickback here. I see a lot of kickback here.
There's a lot of kickbacks.
Tremendous kickback, because nobody could be so stupid to give out some of these contracts.
Yeah.
So he has to get a kickback.
All right, so get this. Former President Trump and Elon Musk are teaming up to try and expose government waste.
Wow.
We're going to deep dive into this press conference that they had about their new initiative. It's called Doge.
Doge.
And you really want to hear what we found? I mean, from a mysterious limestone mine to some seriously bizarre Social Security payments.
Oh, wow.
This is a wild ride. So are you ready to uncover some secrets with me?
I am always ready to uncover secrets.
Perfect. All right, so...
This is an interesting pairing, right?
Yeah.
Former President Trump and Elon Musk.
It's not who I would have put together.
Right. They're tackling a topic that really everyone has an opinion on.
Right.
How the government spends our money.
Mm-hmm.
What makes Doge different, though, is that their aim is to not just point fingers,
right,
but actually try to shrink the budget deficit, reduce bureaucratic power, and make sure that tax dollars are being used effectively.
And Musk was really pushing for transparency during this press conference. He was saying that all this bureaucracy, it really hurts the economy, and it drives prices up for all of us.
Yeah.
So he wants Doge to basically shine a spotlight on everything the government is doing and make it clear to everybody.
Which, kind of fits with Musk's style in general.
Right.
Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink.
Yeah.
He's all about disrupting systems and really pushing those boundaries. So Doge almost seems like his way of trying to do that with, like, the massive system that is the federal government.
Yeah, and some of the examples that they gave during this press conference are kind of hard to believe.
Oh, really?
They talked about one woman who had a government salary.
Okay.
And somehow she ended up worth tens of millions of dollars.
How does that even happen?
I have no idea.
That raises a lot of questions, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like, could it be a conflict of interest? Did something slip through the cracks in terms of oversight?
Right.
We need more information to understand that situation fully.
Yeah, and then they went on to claim that the Treasury Department's just giving out blank checks.
Oh, wow.
With, like, almost no financial control.
Seriously?
They said they can't even pass audits, and their do not pay list is more like a suggestion than an actual rule.
Wait, so the government has a do not pay list?
Apparently.
Huh. I had no idea.
I didn't either until I was researching this. So this list is supposed to prevent payments to certain people or entities.
Okay.
But if it's not being enforced, that's a huge issue.
It's a massive problem.
Think about it. If they can't even manage basic financial controls, how much money is being wasted?
Right. How much is being misspent?
Okay, so this one's straight out of a movie.
Okay.
Social Security payments are going to people who are supposedly over 150 years old.
What?
And to others with no real identifying information.
Oh, wow. Are they paid ghosts now?
I don't know. It's pretty wild. And that's where the need for accurate data comes in.
Yeah.
These payments are going out to people with incomplete or just clearly inaccurate information, which suggests there are some serious problems with the government's record keeping.
Yeah, for sure.
And here's the kicker. They said all this retirement paperwork, it's processed By hand.
By hand.
In a limestone mine.
A limestone mine?
A limestone mine.
Wow.
You would think in the 21st century we would have a better system
Right.
than hauling boxes of paper underground.
Yeah, it does seem odd.
It's very strange.
It seems like this really points to a bigger problem
Right.
with how resistant to change some parts of the government can be. Like, why stick with such an outdated system
Right.
when there are digital solutions available?
Yeah.
It makes you wonder if this is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to outdated processes.
Yeah, and the whole thing gets even more complicated because Doge is claiming that billions of dollars are going to foreign fraud rings
Oh, wow.
that are operating right here in the U.S.
Here.
They say these rings are targeting programs like Social Security and Medicare.
That's a serious accusation.
Yeah.
And it has national security implications as well.
Mm-hmm.
If those programs are that vulnerable to fraud,
Right.
it really raises concerns about their overall security and how effectively they're being managed.
Okay, so Doge is definitely shaking things up.
Yeah.
But they've also got their critics.
Oh, of course.
Some people are worried about potential conflicts of interest.
Right.
Since Musk companies get a lot of money from government contracts.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
So you have to wonder if him being involved with Doge is a way of maybe trying to influence those contracts.
That's a valid concern.
Yeah, and Trump even addressed this.
Okay.
He said that he'd step back from any decisions where a conflict of interest might come up, but, not everyone's convinced.
Right.
And this whole thing has also gotten tied up in some legal battles.
Oh, really?
Where some judges are actually trying to stop Doge's investigation.
So you've got this tension
Yeah.
between transparency and then respecting legal processes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really at the heart of a lot of debates around government reform.
Right.
So exposing waste is super important.
Yeah.
But these investigations also need to be done fairly and legally.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really delicate balance.
It is. So we've got all this going on,
Yeah.
shocking claims, potential conflicts of interests, and legal fights.
Yeah.
But what does it all actually mean?
Right.
If Doge is able to do what they're setting out to do, what could this look like
Yeah.
for the economy and the government as a whole?
Well, Musk has actually said he thinks that Doge could cut the budget deficit in half
Wow.
and that it could lead to some pretty major economic growth.
Really?
His argument is that if the government borrows less money,
Mm-hmm.
interest rates could go down.
Okay.
And that would save everybody money in the long run.
Yeah.
So it's not just about the government saving money.
Right.
It's about the potential positive ripple effects throughout the economy.
And if Doge keeps finding these things
Mhm.
and making them public, it could really force the government to be more careful about how they're spending money.
Right.
People are already frustrated with government waste as it is,
Mhm.
and this could push them to demand even more accountability from elected officials.
Absolutely. And that shift in public perception
Yeah.
could have some really big consequences.
Oh, for sure.
It could influence everything from elections to how government agencies actually operate.
So Doge has focused a lot on this one agency in particular. It's
Right.
called the U.S. Agency for International Development,
Right.
or USAID,
USAID.
which handles foreign aid. But what exactly is foreign aid?
So USAID is basically the agency that distributes financial and humanitarian aid
Okay.
to other countries.
Okay.
So think about things like disaster relief,
Mm-hmm.
economic development programs,
Mhm.
or helping countries improve their healthcare systems,
Okay.
that kind of thing.
Got it. And Doge has really gone after them.
Yeah.
They've been raising questions about how effective USAID actually is,
Mhm.
and even suggesting that the whole agency might be riddled with corruption.
Oh, wow.
They've even hinted that maybe the entire agency should just be shut down.
Shut down the whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a pretty drastic move,
It is.
considering how involved USAID is in U.S. foreign policy.
It's like they're walking a tightrope, right?
Yeah.
They're trying to expose this inefficiency, but
Yeah.
also risking disrupting crucial aid programs.
Yeah.
This has sparked a lot of debate.
I did.
Because it's a perfect example of this challenge of trying to deal with government waste.
Right.
It's rarely as simple as just cutting programs or agencies entirely.
Yeah, for sure.
So you might be listening to this and thinking, well, I don't even know what USAID is.
Right.
So why should I care about any of this?
Well, USAID's actions, effective or not,
Mm-hmm.
can impact everything from global health
Right.
to democracy efforts around the world.
Okay.
So if Doge is right about all this mismanagement and corruption,
Mhm.
it could actually hurt U.S. credibility and influence on the global stage.
That makes sense.
And, it all comes back to those tax dollars.
Right.
If USAID isn't using its budget,
Yeah.
well, that means less money for other things.
For sure.
Whether that's programs here at home or different foreign policy goals.
So we'll get into more of what Doge is doing in our next segment, but
Okay.
it gets even more interesting from here. Trust me. So we talked about USAID and all these claims of mismanagement and possible corruption, but Doge didn't stop there. They've also been looking into some other pretty major government agencies, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Doge has been digging into a whole range of departments.
Okay.
And some of their findings are just as surprising as what we've already talked about.
Okay.
Like, for example, they've been looking into the Department of Defense.
The Pentacle?
Yeah, often referred to as the Pentagon.
That's where a huge chunk of our tax dollars go, right?
Exactly. It's actually the largest discretionary spending item in the whole entire federal budget.
Wow.
And Doge is claiming that a lot of that money is being wasted.
How so? What kind of waste are we talking about?
Well, they pointed to things like contracts being extended way beyond their original terms.
Okay.
Sometimes for years.
Seriously.
Or even decades longer than intended. Yeah, and that translates into millions, potentially billions of dollars spent unnecessarily.
They even mention one case where a 3-month consultant contract was somehow extended for 20 years.
30 years.
How does something like that even happen?
It does make you scratch your head, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Doge is arguing that this type of mismanagement is really a symptom of a bigger problem within the Department of Defense.
Okay.
And that's a lack of careful oversight when it comes to these contracts.
So are they saying that people at the Pentagon are like intentionally pocketing this money?
Not necessarily. They've kind of suggested that it's more about incompetence and a lack of attention to detail rather than outright corruption.
Gotcha.
They're claiming there's like this culture of complacency when it comes to managing these huge contracts.
But even if it's not intentional, wasting that much money is still a massive issue.
Oh, absolutely. Whether it's through like negligence or deliberate action, misspending taxpayer money is a big deal.
Right.
And it's something that Doge is really trying to bring to light. And their focus on the Department of Defense is especially significant because of its enormous budget.
Makes sense. So Doge is basically saying that if they can tighten up contract management and make sure that the Pentagon is actually spending money efficiently, they could free up a lot of resources.
Precisely. And Doge argues that all of that wasted money could be used for much more important things.
Like what?
Like providing better equipment and training to the military.
Okay.
Or investing in research and development of new technologies.
That makes sense. If we're spending billions of dollars on contracts that aren't even necessary,
right,
it's got to be affecting the military's ability to do their job well.
Right. Doge is framing this as not just about saving money, but also about strengthening national security.
Wow.
They're saying that all this wasteful spending within the Pentagon could actually make the country less safe.
That's a really powerful argument. I can see that resonating with a lot of people.
Yeah, definitely.
So it's not just the Department of Defense, right?
Yeah.
Doge is going after other agencies too, like the Department of Education.
Yeah, they've been raising concerns about the spending within the Department of Education. They're alleging that billions are wasted.
On what?
On programs that they consider ineffective or on what they call administrative bloat.
What does that mean, administrative bloat?
They're basically talking about unnecessary layers of bureaucracy. Too many administrators, and not enough focus on actual teaching and learning.
Gotcha.
They're also questioning the effectiveness of certain programs and suggesting that some could be eliminated or revamped to save money.
So they've also talked about how outdated some government systems are. Like, remember that whole thing about federal retirement paperwork being processed in a limestone mine?
It's ridiculous.
It's crazy.
But Doge is using that as an example to illustrate a bigger point about the government's resistance to modernization. They're claiming that clinging to these old systems is costing taxpayers a fortune.
So if the government embraced technology and streamlined its processes, they could save a lot of money without having to sacrifice the services that they're providing.
Exactly. They're not just about making cuts just for the sake of cutting. They're advocating for like a smarter, more efficient approach to government operations.
That sounds good in theory, but how would that actually work in practice?
Well, that's where the debate gets tricky.
Yeah.
It's one thing to identify waste and suggest improvements. But actually implementing those changes in a massive and complex system.
Like the federal government.
Like the federal government is a huge challenge.
It raises a lot of questions, right? Like who decides which programs are essential and which ones are wasteful? And then how do you streamline these complicated processes without causing major disruptions?
Those are all really valid concerns. Doge has definitely sparked a very important conversation. About government waste and efficiency. But the solutions aren't always straightforward.
So it's not as simple as just saying cut spending or get rid of this agency.
Exactly. This is a complex issue with a lot of nuances. It requires careful consideration and a willingness to engage in like a constructive dialogue to find the best path forward.
Doge has also run into some legal roadblocks along the way, right?
Yeah, that's right. They've had some clashes with judges who've tried to block their investigations.
So some critics have said that Doge is kind of overstepping their bounds and not really operating within established legal frameworks.
Yeah, and then on the flip side, you have Trump and Musk accusing some judges of being part of the deep state.
Oh, wow.
And protecting corrupt officials.
Seriously.
It's a very contentious situation.
So we've got this tension between Doge's efforts to expose wrongdoing,
Right.
and then the need to also respect the legal processes.
Yeah.
It seems like a really tricky balance to strike.
It is. This highlights like a fundamental challenge.
Okay.
In any effort to reform government, you need to find a way to expose this potential corruption without undermining the rule of law.
Yeah.
It's a delicate dance.
And I imagine that this whole thing is really resonating with a lot of people who are frustrated with all this government waste. People want to see their tax dollars being used responsibly.
Right.
And they want to believe that someone is holding those in power accountable.
That's a big part of why Doge has gotten so much attention, despite all the controversies surrounding their methods. People are hungry for change, and they're really drawn to this idea of shaking things up and challenging the status quo.
So where do we go from here? What's like the next chapter in this story?
It's still early days for Doge. They're continuing with their investigations. They're digging into more government agencies and pushing for these reforms.
Okay.
But they're also facing all these mounting legal challenges and scrutiny from people who question their motives and their methods.
So this battle is far from over.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see how it all plays out.
The outcome of all this could have a huge impact on the future of government transparency and accountability. Like, if Doge succeeds in implementing some meaningful reforms, it could inspire similar initiatives all across the country.
But if they fail, or if their approach is seen as too extreme, it could actually set back efforts to hold government officials accountable.
Yeah, that's true.
For all this wasteful spending.
It's a high-stakes gamble.
It is.
With the potential for some really far-reaching consequences.
Let's talk about those consequences. Speaking of consequences, how could Doge's actions impact the economy and the political landscape as a whole? Those are some pretty big implications to consider.
You're absolutely right. Doge's work has the potential to really create waves that go far beyond just these individual government agencies. So for starters, Musk has made some pretty bold predictions about the economic benefits of reducing the deficit.
He said that Doge could potentially cut the budget deficit in half?
Which is a huge claim.
It is.
It's important to understand the logic behind that prediction, though.
Okay.
Musk's argument is that if the government has less debt, it doesn't have to borrow as much money.
Okay.
And that means lower interest rates.
Right.
Which could actually save consumers money.
On what?
On things like mortgages and loans.
So it's not just about the government saving money. It's about that positive ripple effect that could be felt throughout the economy.
Exactly. If Doge is successful, it could lead to lower costs for businesses and for individuals, which could then stimulate economic growth.
Right.
Of course, this is all contingent on Doge actually being able to achieve those significant cuts in the deficit.
Right. And there's also the potential impact on the political landscape to think about.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I mean, Doge's investigations and all their public pronouncements have definitely stirred things up.
Absolutely. They've like shined this bright light on government spending and raised a lot of questions about how effectively our tax dollars are actually being used.
Right.
So this has the potential to really shift public opinion and influence the way people vote.
It seems like Doge has tapped into like this deep well of frustration that people have with government waste.
For sure.
People are paying attention now, and they're demanding accountability.
This increased scrutiny could lead to a much greater demand for transparency from those elected officials. It could also make government waste a much bigger issue in future elections.
So Doge has the potential to not just influence how the government spends money, but also how people actually view the government and who they choose to elect.
Exactly. Their actions could have this ripple effect that extends far beyond just the agencies that they're targeting.
This brings us to some of the criticisms that have been leveled against Doge. While some people applaud their efforts, others have raised some pretty serious concerns.
We talked about the concerns around conflicts of interest and Doge's legal battles, but there are some other criticisms to consider as well.
Like what else are people saying?
Well, some critics have accused Doge of being politically motivated.
Okay.
They're arguing that Doge is selectively targeting certain agencies or programs to advance like a particular political agenda.
Yeah, it's hard to ignore the fact that Doge is being led by a former president
Right.
and a prominent CEO,
Yeah,
both of whom have been very vocal about their own political views.
exactly. And that raises questions about whether Doge's mission is truly about eliminating waste
Right.
or if it's also about trying to score some political points.
Yeah.
It's really difficult to separate those two things entirely.
And that perception of political bias
Yeah.
can make it harder for people to take Doge's findings seriously,
Hmm.
even if those findings are valid.
Absolutely. If people believe that Doge is like cherry-picking examples
Right.
or exaggerating certain issues to fit a narrative,
Yeah.
it undermines their credibility.
So even if Doge is uncovering legitimate waste,
Yep.
the way they're going about it could be making it harder for
Right.
them to achieve their goals.
It's a really tricky situation.
It is.
They need to find a way to address these concerns about political bias
Yeah.
if they want to gain broader support for their efforts.
Another criticism is that Doge's methods are just too aggressive
Okay.
or even reckless.
Some critics have argued that Doge's approach could actually disrupt essential government services
Okay.
or unfairly target individuals without due process.
So they've been accused of making these sweeping generalizations about entire agencies
Right.
based on maybe just a few isolated examples.
And that raises questions about fairness
Mm-hmm.
and the need for balance.
For sure.
While it's super important to expose waste and hold people accountable,
Yeah.
it's equally important to make sure that the investigations are thorough
Mm-hmm.
and that the accusations are supported by solid evidence.
So Doge is walking a fine line here.
Yeah.
They're trying to shine a light on potential wrongdoing without creating this climate of fear and suspicion
Right.
in the government.
Exactly. Navigating that terrain requires careful consideration
Yeah.
and a strong commitment to fairness.
It's important to acknowledge that Doge has its supporters
Mhm.
as well as its detractors.
Oh, for sure. There are plenty of people who believe that Doge is doing important work
Okay.
and that their efforts are long overdue.
What do those people say?
Well, they argue that Doge is bringing much-needed attention
Mm-hmm.
to this problem of government waste
Right.
and that their investigations are shedding light on issues that would otherwise remain hidden.
So it's a complex situation.
It is.
With a lot of different perspectives.
Yeah, it's important to understand all sides of the issue
Right.
before you form an opinion.
For sure.
You know, we've really explored a lot of ground in this deep dive.
Yeah, we are.
From Doge's specific findings
Mm-hmm.
to the potential impact of their work
Right.
and all the criticisms that they've faced.
I think it's clear that Doge is a controversial initiative
It is
that has sparked a lot of debate.
a lot of debate.
But it's also clear that they've raised some very important questions
Yeah.
about government spending, accountability, and the role of transparency.
For sure.
In our next segment, we'll wrap things up by exploring the potential long-term consequences of Doge's actions and what it all means for the future of government reform. So we've got people on both sides here. Some think Doge is doing great work, and others are pretty skeptical of the whole thing. But what if we zoom out a little? Even with all this controversy, could there be some positives that come out of Doge's efforts?
I think that's a really great question. Even if someone doesn't agree with everything Doge is doing, it's kind of hard to deny that they've brought a lot of attention to this issue of government waste. You know, it's something that often gets swept under the rug.
Right.
They forced a conversation that a lot of politicians would probably rather just avoid.
It's like they're holding up this magnifying glass to how the government spends our money, whether people like it or not.
Exactly. And that increased scrutiny could be a good thing in the long run. You know, if voters are more informed about where their tax dollars are actually going,
Yeah.
they're more likely to hold their elected officials accountable and demand greater efficiency.
So even if Doge doesn't directly lead to all the changes they're hoping for,
Right.
they might indirectly cause some shifts in how the government operates just by bringing this issue to the forefront.
Exactly. They've kind of planted a seed.
Yeah.
And it'll be interesting to see what grows from it. You know, if Doge can inspire a more engaged and informed citizenry, that could have some pretty far-reaching consequences for how the government is run.
And it's not just about awareness, right? There's also the potential for Doge to spark actual reforms within the government.
Absolutely. If they can point to these systemic problems and suggest some practical solutions that save money and improve efficiency, it could lead to some real change in the way things are done.
But then you have those potential downsides we talked about.
Yeah.
The possibility of disrupting essential services, the questions about their political motivations,
Yeah.
and the worry that maybe their methods are just too extreme.
It's a tough balance. Exposing waste and pushing for reform is important, but it needs to be done responsibly, fairly, and needs to respect the rule of law.
It's like Doge has thrown this big rock into the pond, and we're still seeing the ripples spread out.
That's a great analogy. And it's still too early to say for sure what the ultimate impact of those ripples will be.
So where does this leave us, the listeners? We've explored so much information, we've heard different perspectives, and even uncovered some pretty wild examples of government spending.
I think the big takeaway here is that the whole question of government waste and accountability is something that affects us all.
Right.
It's a complex issue, there's no easy answers, and it requires critical thinking and engagement from everyone.
Yeah, we can't just sit back and accept whatever information is thrown at us.
Right.
We got to be willing to question our assumptions, consider different viewpoints, and form our own informed opinions.
And as you guys continue to learn about this issue, we encourage you to seek out diverse sources of information and have those respectful conversations with people who might have different views.
It's through these conversations and a commitment to being informed citizens that we can hopefully work towards a more efficient, effective, and accountable government.
Well said. The Doge Initiative has definitely started this really fascinating and important debate. And it's going to be really interesting to see how it all plays out in the coming months and years.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of government spending and the Doge Initiative. Until next time, keep questioning everything.